Greetings, dear subscribers and casual listeners of my channel. Hermione is one of my favorite characters in Harry Potter, and honestly, one of my favorite characters in general, and I truly admire Emma Watson in her role. But even so, I have to admit, the movie version of Hermione feels far less layered, interesting, and alive than the one from the books, but those are just empty words. A personal opinion you may agree with or not. So let's do something better. Let's look at specific examples of how the Hermione from the books differs from her on-screen counterpart. I promise it will be far more interesting. Enjoy watching. Number 1, she's better than you. Sometimes it feels as if Hermione is the true main character of the story, not Harry. With every new film she takes more initiative, while Harry and Ron often look like helpless sidekicks next to her. But in the books it played out differently. For example, in Prisoner of Azkaban it was Ron with a broken leg who stood between Harry and Sirius, ready to die alongside his friend. In the movie that moment was given to Hermione. Or take Deathly Hallows Part 2, the plan to escape from Gringotts on the Dragon originally belonged to Harry in the book. In the film, though, the idea was credited to Hermione. There are plenty of such examples, and they all create the impression that Hermione is better than everyone else. Number 2, a Muggle-born girl. The screenwriters often forgot that Hermione grew up in a Muggle family. Because of that, in the movies, she looks like an encyclopedia of the wizarding world, whereas in the books, she didn't know everything. For instance, in the book, it's Ron who explains the meaning of the word mudblood. In the movie, it's Hermione herself. The same with Quidditch. In Philosopher's Stone, it's McGonagall who says Harry's father was a great player, but in the film that line goes to Hermione. The books made it clear, despite her vast knowledge, Hermione wasn't a magical encyclopedia, but a girl discovering a new world. Number 3. No mercy. In Goblet of Fire, during Moody's lesson, Hermione showed her usual eagerness. She raised her hand 3 times and boldly cast the killing curse. In the movie, however, she shrank back, holding back tears and remaining silent. The book version is harsher and more realistic. Hermione had no illusions about what was to come, and still answered honestly. Number 4, the unbearable know-it-all. Yes, Hermione is smart and studious. But it's one thing to quote textbooks in class and another to act in a critical moment. In the Trolls scene, movie Hermione doesn't panic. She hides, calls for help, and suggests a spell. In the book, she freezes and nearly becomes a burden to Harry and Ron. The same with Devil's Snare. On screen, Hermione decisively casts a spell. In the book, she panics, tries to recall Professor Sprout's lessons, and only after Ron's hint does she think to conjure fire. The movie Hermione is braver and more composed than her book counterpart. Number 5, wise beyond her years. One of the most quoted lines, "Fear of a name only increases fear of the thing itself," wasn't Hermione's in the books at all. It belonged to Dumbledore. But the filmmakers decided such words would sound better coming from a 12-year-old girl. It's effective, yes, but not very logical. In the books, Hermione herself almost always used euphemisms like "you know who" or "he who must not be named." Number 6, clash of opposites. In the movies, Hermione and Luna's relationship is reduced to quiet coexistence. In the books, they often clashed. Hermione tried to disprove Luna's beliefs, while Luna stubbornly stuck to her fantasies. That conflict made both characters shine brighter. In the films, it was smoothed over, leaving Hermione looking tolerant and soft, while the book version was sharper and more stubborn. Number 7, the required point, and of course we can't ignore her appearance. In the books, Hermione had bushy hair and large front teeth. That's why her transformation at the Yule Ball was so striking. In the films, though, the difference was barely noticeable. Emma Watson looked almost perfect from the start. That's why the movie version of the scene never had the same impact as the book. Number 8, driving force or team player. In the books, Hermione is the foundation of the trio, but not the leader who drives every decision. Her role is to support, to advise, to provide the knowledge Harry and Ron often lack. When Harry struggles with the mystery of the Half-Blood Prince's textbook, Hermione is baffled. She does not recognize sectum sempra and openly admits her frustration. Rowling writes, "I don't know what this spell is, Harry, but it sounds dangerous. You shouldn't use it." Her ignorance in this moment matters. It reminds us she is brilliant but not all-knowing. And that Harry must ultimately face choices alone. The film changes the dynamic. Instead of showing Hermione's limits, it gives her the authority to explain sectum sempra and caution Harry with certainty. Suddenly she feels like the driving force of the trio, the one who understands everything, while Harry and Ron fall into the background. The balance of the books, leader, strategist, and loyal friend, turns into a hierarchy where Hermione towers above the others. It makes her powerful, yes, but it also steals from the authenticity of their teamwork. Number 9, romantic storyline with Ron. In the books, Hermione and Ron's romance builds slowly, almost painfully. Their arguments are sharp because they care too much to stay indifferent. In Half-Blood Prince, when Ron starts dating Lavender Brown, Hermione's reaction is raw and human. She storms out of the common room and later attacks Ron with a flock of enchanted canaries. Rowling captures her fury. The little birds whirred angrily around Ron's head, pecking and clawing at him until he yelled and ducked for cover. It is jealousy, heartbreak, and comedy all in one. These messy emotions make their eventual union believable. On screen, the tension is reduced to a few jealous glances and awkward silences. The canary scene never appears. The long weeks of bitterness between them vanish. By skipping over these conflicts, the films flatten their romance into something cleaner, but less authentic. Viewers see them as destined from the start rather than two flawed teenagers, stumbling, fighting, and finally realizing they belong together. The heat of their journey is lost, and with it, the depth of Hermione's heart. Number 10, Fighter for Justice, SPEW. In the books, Hermione's fight for justice is one of her defining qualities. She creates SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, after learning that Hogwarts house elves are unpaid servants. While Harry and Ron roll their eyes, she throws herself into the cause with pamphlets, badges, and endless speeches. Rowling shows her passion when she declares, "You know, house elves get a very raw deal. It's slavery, that's what it is." It is idealistic, sometimes naive, but it proves she cares about more than exams and adventures. Her activism is not just comic relief. In Goblet of Fire, when Winky is dismissed by Mr. Crouch, Hermione is horrified by the injustice. She is the only one who takes Winky's tears seriously, while others shrug. She argues fiercely with Ron, who insists that elves like serving. The debate becomes heated, uncomfortable, and very real. It paints Hermione as someone who refuses to accept cruelty, even when the entire society around her normalizes it. The films erase this side of her completely. There is no SPEW, no fiery arguments, no scenes of Hermione campaigning for change while her friends groan. Without it, she becomes a clever problem solver, but not a reformer. Her sense of justice, one of the most human, imperfect, and inspiring parts of her character, disappears. On screen, she is simply the brilliant friend. In the books, she is a fighter who believes even house elves deserve dignity. Number 11, humor and weaknesses. Hermione in the books is not flawless, and that is what makes her memorable. She can be stubborn to the point of irritation. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when she reports Harry's firebolt to Professor McGonagall, she is absolutely convinced she is right. Ron explodes with anger, and their friendship nearly breaks. Rowling captures the sting of her self-righteousness when Ron shouts, "You're ruining everything, Hermione!" It is petty, painful, and also funny because it feels so much like the kind of drama only teenagers can create. The films smooth over these rough edges. Hermione rarely makes mistakes that hurt her friends. The firebolt argument is shortened to a brief exchange, almost weightless. The stubborn girl who cannot help following rules even at the cost of her friend's trust, is gone. What remains is a calm voice of wisdom, always ready with the right answer. It makes her safer but less alive. Her jealousy is another layer stripped away. In Goblet of Fire, Hermione is furious when Ron mocks her. After the Yule Ball, she yells, "Next time, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." It is a sharp, emotional outburst that reveals her feelings. She is vulnerable, insecure, and hurt by Ron's blindness. The scene brims with teenage awkwardness. In the film, the quarrel is softened, played almost as comedy, and her raw emotions are barely felt. Even her humor is muted. In the books, Hermione's quick temper often creates comedic sparks. She can snap, pout, or unleash a sarcastic jab that makes readers laugh in spite of her anger. The films replace these moments with poise and seriousness. Without the clumsy mistakes and sharp retorts, Hermione turns into an idealized figure. The messy charm of a girl who is brilliant but imperfect is lost, and with it goes part of her magic. Number 12. Leader or assistant? In the books, Hermione is the voice of reason, not the leader. She offers knowledge, facts, and strategies, but the final call always belongs to Harry. That balance defines their dynamic. Harry may stumble, doubt himself, or even make reckless choices, but he remains the one others follow. Hermione is his guide, not his commander. This distinction is crucial because it shows why Harry, with all his flaws, truly embodies the role of leader. The films change this balance. In Deathly Hallows Part 1, after weeks of wandering and frustration, Harry collapses in despair. On screen, it is Hermione who steps forward, calm and determined, pushing the group onward. She reassures him, holds the plan together, and appears to carry the weight that Harry has dropped. The moment looks strong and inspiring, but it shifts the role from the boy who lived to the girl who knows best. Rowling writes a different truth. In the book, after Dumbledore's death and months of confusion, Harry himself regains control. It was he who had been chosen, and he would have to do it. No one else could. Hermione is there, loyal and supportive, but it is Harry who finds the inner strength to lead them into danger. That choice, painful and lonely, defines his character. Without it, his growth into a true leader feels incomplete. By giving Hermione this leadership on screen, the films smooth out Harry's struggles and elevate her beyond her role as advisor. It makes her appear almost flawless, while Harry loses some of his defining moments of courage. The book Hermione shines because she supports and challenges her friends, not because she replaces them. The film Hermione, however, sometimes looks like the real commander of the trio, and that small shift changes the story's heart. Number 13. Hermione and friendship conflicts. Hermione's friendship with Harry and Ron is not perfect in the books, and that is exactly what makes it powerful. In Goblet of Fire, when Ron accuses Harry of cheating to put his name in the goblet, Hermione is caught in the middle. She tries to support Harry, but Ron's anger creates a rift that forces her to choose sides. For weeks, tension hangs between the three of them. Rowling writes, Hermione, meanwhile, was not speaking to either of them, but kept herself busy with her books. The silence, the slammed doors, the cold stares, these are the struggles of real teenage friendship. In the films, this sharp edge is softened. The conflict over the Triwizard Tournament is reduced to brief, almost playful exchanges. Hermione never pulls away in frustration, and the painful awkwardness of being stuck between two friends at war is never shown. She is always the steady voice of reason, the calm anchor. It looks neat on screen, but it loses the raw truth of three adolescents learning how to handle loyalty, jealousy, and pride. Another striking example comes from Prisoner of Azkaban. In the book, Hermione and Ron nearly stop speaking altogether after the Firebolt argument and the Crookshanks versus Scabbers drama. The bitterness grows so strong that Harry feels trapped between them. Rowling shows how small arguments can explode into deep wounds. They had had a blazing row about Crookshanks and Scabbers. Harry didn't know what to say to either of them. It is messy and uncomfortable, but real. The film erases much of this tension. The firebolt scene lasts only moments, and the pet feud is barely addressed. On screen, the trio appears unbreakable, their bond almost too perfect. But the books remind us that true friendship is tested by arguments, misunderstandings, and the courage to forgive. By removing those struggles, the films made their bond easier to watch, but less believable. Number 14, Courage and Fear. In the books, Hermione Granger's courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to face it. When she first encounters the mountain troll in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, she does not act like a hero. She freezes in panic. Rowling describes her as standing as though she was glued to the spot, mouth open in horror. Harry has to pull her, shouting for her to run, but she cannot move. This moment shows her as a real 11-year-old child, overwhelmed by terror, not a flawless heroine. That fear is what makes her later bravery meaningful. After the troll is defeated, she takes the blame to protect Harry and Ron from punishment. Her voice trembles, yet she lies to Professor McGonagall, saying the troll was her fault. It is a small but decisive act of courage. Rowling shows us that Hermione's strength grows out of vulnerability. She does not pretend to be unshaken, she chooses to act despite the shaking. The films give us a very different picture. In the same troll scene, Emma Watson's Hermione does not collapse into silence. She shouts for help, crawls across the bathroom floor, and even manages to tell Ron which spell to use. The fear is there, but it is shallow, quickly replaced by sharp advice. This version of Hermione is confident far too soon. It looks impressive on screen, but it erases the fragile child who learns how to be brave step by step. This contrast matters because Rowling's Hermione grows into her courage. She panics in the Devil's Snare, forgetting that she is a witch, until Ron yells at her, "Are you a witch or not?" She blushes, then acts. It is clumsy, awkward, but real. In the films, that hesitation is gone, replaced by a polished hero who rarely falters. Book Hermione shows us that fear and courage walk together. Film Hermione shows us only the courage, and something essential is lost. Number 15, Growing Up and Maturity. Hermione Granger's journey in the Harry Potter books is one of the most carefully crafted arcs of growth and maturity, a progression that begins with her first appearance on the Hogwarts Express in Philosopher's Stone and culminates in her fierce defiance against oppression in Deathly Hallows. On the page, we meet a girl who clings to rules like a lifeline, proudly declaring, "I hope I'm in Gryffindor, it sounds by far the best." At 11, her identity is inseparable from authority, exams, and a desperate need to prove herself. But the Hermione that marches into the Forbidden Forest with Harry and Ron in the final book is no longer the same child. She is transformed by the weight of experience, of injustice, and of choosing friendship and morality above rigid systems. This transformation is central to her character, yet the films, while capturing Emma Watson's intelligence and charisma, blur this progression, presenting a Hermione who is already wise, brave, and composed from the beginning, leaving little room for the breathtaking arc of growth Rowling wrote. In the novels, Hermione's early obsession with rules is almost comical. In Philosopher's Stone, she reprimands Harry and Ron constantly, reminding them that we could have been killed, or worse, expelled. The exaggerated priority she places on academic discipline paints her as a child whose world is neatly ordered by structure. Rowling crafts her with flaws, from her social awkwardness to her near-insufferable insistence on authority. This makes her later willingness to defy authority all the more powerful. By the time she convinces Harry and Ron to form Dumbledore's army in Order of the Phoenix, she has abandoned her former reverence for the Ministry and even for the school's authority figures. This change carries dramatic weight precisely because we once knew her as the girl who docked points from friends in her imagination when they broke the rules. The films, however, give us a Hermione whose personality is less layered. From her first appearance, she is already confident, already heroic, already brimming with bravery that borders on perfection. The insecure 11-year-old girl who bursts into tears after Ron's cruel words before the troll attack is softened in the cinematic version. In the books, that moment is a turning point. The shy, bookish girl who cries in a bathroom becomes the friend who lies to teachers to protect Harry and Ron, cementing their trio. The nuance of that development is vital. It is the painful vulnerability that allows her to bond with others. On screen, however, she already seems fearless, and the richness of her emotional evolution is diluted. By the second book, Rowling reveals another stage of Hermione's development, the bravery of intellect. In Chamber of Secrets, she is the one who researches the basilisk and creates the clue that saves everyone, even though she herself is petrified before she can deliver it. This courage comes not from swinging a wand in battle, but from trusting her mind in the face of real danger. The Hermione who once idolized teachers now begins to act independently, solving mysteries that professors have failed to unravel. Her willingness to prepare Polyjuice Potion in secret is another leap from the obedient girl of the first year. She takes a risk, breaks rules, and demonstrates that knowledge can be subversive. In the books, this act feels radical. In the films, by contrast, she takes on these rebellious tasks with such composure that they seem inevitable, stripping the tension from her evolution. Rowling's Hermione is also allowed to be deeply flawed, and these flaws give her humanity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she makes mistakes that stem from her controlling nature. She buys a cat that terrifies Ron's rat, secretly uses the time turner without trusting her friends, and pushes Harry toward reporting his firebolt. The girl who cried in a bathroom now loses friends because of her righteousness. Rowling does not shy away from her stubbornness or her judgmental streak. The slow reconciliation with Ron shows how friendship for Hermione is not automatic, but earned through conflict and forgiveness. In the films, these conflicts are minimized, reducing Hermione to a voice of reason instead of a flawed adolescent learning from her missteps. The climax of Hermione's growth occurs in Goblet of Fire and Order of the Phoenix. She steps into leadership. The creation of SPERW, while often mocked by readers, is a crucial milestone in her maturity. Her empathy expands beyond her own circle to marginalized beings like house elves. The activism may be naive, but it reflects a girl who is beginning to grapple with injustice and systemic cruelty. When she later becomes the architect of Dumbledore's army, Hermione demonstrates that her early moral idealism has transformed into organized rebellion. "You're a really good teacher, Harry," she says, after helping to build the group. And this moment marks her full embrace of collective action. Without her vision, the resistance would never have existed. In the films, these political elements are stripped away. There is no SPEW, no activism, no full sense of Hermione's moral awakening. Her role as DA's organizer is present, but it feels less like growth and more like continuation of traits she always had. The Hermione of the later books is also marked by fear and sacrifice. In Half-Blood Prince, she suffers jealousy, heartbreak, and confusion, making her more human than the composed heroine of the films. Her heartbreak over Ron's relationship with Lavender Brown reveals vulnerabilities that contradict her earlier stoicism. In the books, Hermione is not invincible. She is a teenage girl confronting emotions she cannot control. Rowling shows her maturing not just in battles against Voldemort, but in her struggles to navigate love, pride, and forgiveness. The films, while acknowledging her jealousy, present it in shallow brushstrokes, more comic relief than emotional crucible. Number 16, Hermione and Ron, an equal partnership in J.K. Rowling's books, Hermione Granger and Ron Weasley, are portrayed as equals, partners who constantly test one another's patience but ultimately find strength in their bond. Hermione, with her intelligence and strong will, often pushes Ron to act beyond his comfort zone, while Ron, with his humor, loyalty, and surprising flashes of courage, grounds Hermione when her perfectionist tendencies threaten to overwhelm her. In the pages of the novels, there is a sense that they grow together, and by the end of the story, their romance feels like a natural extension of years of shared adventures, arguments, reconciliations, and moments of unspoken tenderness. But the films take a different approach. Instead of showcasing Ron's bravery and depth, they frequently reduce him to comic relief while elevating Hermione to the role of constant savior. This creates a strange imbalance, making it appear as though Hermione has paired with someone beneath her level rather than someone who challenges her and supports her as an equal. One of the clearest examples lies in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. In the book, Ron is the one who wins the life-sized game of wizard chess, sacrificing himself strategically so that Harry can go forward to the final confrontation. Rowling gives him an iconic line, "That's chess, you've got to make some sacrifices." It is a moment of intelligence, bravery, and leadership. Ron steps into the spotlight and proves his value, not as a follower, but as someone capable of making hard choices. In the film adaptation, while the chess scene remains, its weight is diminished. The dramatic focus shifts more heavily to Harry, and Ron's sacrifice feels more like a plot device than a showcase of his inner strength. The audience barely sees the thought process behind his decision. Instead of cementing him as Hermione's equal in cleverness and bravery, he is left overshadowed. The second book, The Chamber of Secrets, provides another opportunity to compare the portrayals. In the novel, Ron's loyalty is front and center. He drives a flying car into Hogwarts with Harry, challenges Professor Lockhart's uselessness, and fiercely defends Hermione when Draco Malfoy calls her a mudblood. Ron's attempt to curse Draco backfires because his wand is broken, but the anger he feels for Hermione is real and visceral. He is not a passive companion, but someone who stands up against cruelty with reckless bravery. Yet in the film version, his broken wand joke receives more screen time than his actual rage at Malfoy's insult. The emotional depth of his defense is diluted, and instead of seeing Ron as Hermione's protector and equal, the audience laughs at his failed spell. By The Prisoner of Azkaban, Rowling allows Ron to display true courage that foreshadows his later role as Hermione's partner. When confronted with Sirius Black, Ron, with a broken leg, physically places himself between Hermione and what he believes is a dangerous murderer. He shouts, if you want to kill Harry, you'll have to kill us too." This is not the action of a bumbling sidekick, but of someone whose love and loyalty run deeper than his fear. The films keep this line, but they strip away much of the intensity. The camera lingers more on Hermione's expressions of fear and Harry's bravery, while Ron becomes a background note in his own act of heroism. It is another missed chance to show the equality between him and Hermione that the books emphasize. By the time the Goblet of Fire unfolds, the tension between Ron and Hermione deepens into something more romantic, though neither admits it outright. In the book, Ron's jealousy over Victor Krum reveals his growing feelings. His frustration is not only comedic, but deeply human. He lashes out at Hermione, but his anger comes from vulnerability, and Hermione's response is equally fiery. She refuses to let him dismiss her value, shouting that he should have asked her to the ball instead of treating her as an afterthought. This clash is a perfect example of their equality, two stubborn, passionate characters colliding in ways that will eventually forge a bond. In the film, however, Ron's jealousy is exaggerated for humor, and Hermione's anger is framed almost as maternal scolding. The emotional complexity is reduced, and once again, Hermione appears as the rational, superior figure, while Ron is left looking immature. The books never allow Ron to remain in Hermione's shadow for long. In The Order of the Phoenix, his development as a leader begins in earnest. He becomes a prefect alongside Hermione, a recognition from Dumbledore of his growing maturity. This moment is crucial because it signals that Ron is not just comic relief, but someone the headmaster sees as trustworthy and responsible. Hermione may excel academically, but Ron's appointment balances their partnership, showing the world sees value in him too. Yet in the film, this achievement is barely acknowledged. the narrative pushes past Ron's prefect badge, focusing instead on Harry and Hermione's roles. Without this recognition, the viewer sees Ron primarily as Hermione's sidekick, not her equal. Ron's role in The Half-Blood Prince demonstrates another aspect of his character, his independence. Rowling gives him the Quidditch storyline, where he must overcome his insecurities and prove himself as Gryffindor's keeper. This arc is critical to his identity because, for once, Ron steps out from the shadows of Harry and Hermione. When he performs brilliantly, cheered on by his peers, it shows that he is capable of excelling on his own terms. Hermione, in turn, experiences jealousy when he begins dating Lavender Brown, proving that she values him not only as a friend, but as someone she desires. Their relationship becomes more balanced. Here, with both experiencing vulnerability and longing, the films, however, treat Ron's Quidditch triumph as a joke, with Hermione's spell on his drink given more attention than his skill. The complexity of Ron's independence is sacrificed for a quick laugh. Number 17, Hermione and Magic, Theory versus Practice. Hermione Granger's portrayal in the Harry Potter universe has always stood as a bridge between genius and humanity, but when comparing the books to the films, the differences in how her magical skill is shown are striking. On the page, Hermione is a character built on discipline, endless study, and a willingness to make mistakes before finding success. In the films, however, her magic seems effortless, polished to the point of perfection, as though failure never dared approach her. This contrast not only reshapes her character, but also alters the message J.K. Rowling wove into the story about the true meaning of growth and mastery. In the books, Hermione's reputation as the brightest witch of her age is not an accident. She achieves this through relentless effort. From her very first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, she is described as constantly reading ahead, memorizing spells before the rest of her classmates even know what they are. When she tries to show Harry and Ron the spell Alohomora on the train, her eagerness reveals more about her nature than her magical talent. She is not gifted in the raw, instinctive way that Harry is, but instead demonstrates how dedication can transform an ordinary girl into an extraordinary witch. Yet her magic is not flawless. Rowling makes sure to remind readers that knowledge does not guarantee execution. As Hermione herself admits, "I've tried a few simple spells just for practice, and they've all worked for me. Nobody in my family's magic at all. It was ever such a surprise when I got my letter." Philosopher's Stone. That word, practice, tells the truth. Her success is built on countless unseen attempts, on repetition, and on the courage to fail. The films rarely emphasize this nuance. When Emma Watson's Hermione first casts Alohomora to open a locked door in the corridor with the three-headed dog, the spell works immediately, almost too easily. There is no hesitation, no visible trace of nerves or uncertainty. This creates an image of Hermione as a prodigy, a girl who can bend magic to her will without trial and error. While visually satisfying, it erases the layers Rowling gave her. The book, Hermione, who sometimes fumbles, sometimes doubts herself, and only through persistence finds mastery. It is in those imperfections that she becomes relatable, a reminder that brilliance is not about instant perfection, but about effort sustained through difficulty. One of the clearest differences comes in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets during the Polyjuice Potion subplot. In the books, Hermione's meticulous nature leads her to brew the potion successfully, but her haste and overconfidence also bring her failure. She accidentally uses cat hair instead of human hair and spends weeks in the hospital wing recovering. Rowling crafted this mistake as a lesson that even the most diligent student can stumble. Yet in the film adaptation, Hermione's misstep is downplayed. We see her transformation briefly, but it is framed almost as a comedic aside rather than a real consequence of magical imperfection. The gravity of her mistake and the humility it brings her is lost. The book Hermione emerges from that experience reminded that magic demands caution and respect. The film Hermione simply returns to the adventure, seemingly untouched. Another striking example lies in Prisoner of Azkaban. In the novel, Hermione's use of the time turner is not smooth or glamorous. She is exhausted, stressed, and admits to Harry and Ron that she is overwhelmed by the heavy workload she has chosen for herself. Her magic allows her to achieve more, but it also strains her humanity. Rowling shows us that even with magical tools, discipline and sacrifice carry consequences. By contrast, the film presents Hermione's use of the time turner as almost seamless. The narrative tension lies not in her emotional fatigue, but in the clever twist of time-traveling scenes. She appears confident, controlled, and unshaken by the immense responsibility placed on her shoulders. The audience sees not the overworked student, but the poised young witch who bends time itself with ease. The books also highlight Hermione's imperfections in dueling and spontaneous magic. In Order of the Phoenix, during the battle in the Department of Mysteries, she is struck by a curse and rendered unconscious. Before that, her spellwork is effective, but not flawless. She struggles like the rest of Dumbledore's army. Rowling paints her as brave and competent, but not invincible. She fights with determination, but she is vulnerable. In the films, however, her role in combat often feels elevated. When she duels Death Eaters, her spells land with precision, her stance unshaken, her face calm. The chaos and vulnerability Rowling described are replaced with cinematic neatness. This version of Hermione rarely bleeds, rarely stumbles, rarely reminds us that she is still a teenager, facing horrors beyond her years. One of the most poignant illustrations of Hermione's trial and error approach in the books is her early attempt at Wingardium Leviosa. In Philosopher's Stone, she corrects Ron on the pronunciation, insisting, "It's Wingardium Leviosa, make the gar nice and long." She demonstrates it perfectly, yes, but not before practicing. The emphasis is on careful study and application. She succeeds because she listens, applies knowledge, and repeats until she achieves the correct result. The films, however, turn this into a moment of showmanship. Hermione casts the spell flawlessly on her first visible attempt, levitating the feather elegantly while her classmates look on. This creates a subtle but important shift. Her success appears innate, not earned through persistence. Number 18. Humour by J.K. Rowling and its loss in films. In the world of the Harry Potter books, Hermione Granger is not just the brilliant girl who always has her hand raised in class. She is also a constant source of humour, sometimes unintentional, sometimes deliberate, and always memorable. J.K. Rowling crafted her with a balance of intelligence and awkward charm that made her both admirable and amusing. Readers found themselves smiling at her precise recitation of rules, her insistence on quoting obscure passages from books, and the way she often undercut her friends with a sarcastic remark. These moments gave her humanity, ensuring that she was never reduced to a cold, mechanical genius. Yet when the story moved to the big screen, a large part of this humour vanished. The cinematic Hermione became too polished, too smooth, a heroine whose wit and comedic awkwardness rarely broke through the surface. Consider the moment in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone when Hermione first demonstrates her encyclopedic knowledge. After correcting Ron's spellwork, she rattles off, "It's Wingardium Leviosa, not Leviosa," lingering on the last syllable with theatrical precision. The humour in this line comes not only from her correction, but from her exaggerated seriousness. Ron, exasperated, mocks her tone, and the scene becomes one of the funniest exchanges in the book's early chapters. In the film, the moment is recreated, but the delivery changes the tone. Emma Watson speaks with sharp authority, but the subtle comic exaggeration of Hermione's pompousness is absent. Instead of making the audience laugh at her charming pedantry, the film plays it as a simple correction. A layer of humour that defined the character on the page fades away. Rowling also used Hermione's tendency to panic in academic or rule-driven situations as a well of comedy. In The Prisoner of Azkaban, when the boys are fretting about their upcoming divination exam, Hermione scoffs at the subject but still insists on answering every question with textbook precision. Rowling writes, "Hermione snorted, Well, if I had known it would come to this, I'd have learned to read tea. Leaves properly. The humour comes from the contradiction. Hermione thinks divination is nonsense but cannot bear to be unprepared. Her exasperated sighs and cutting remarks add levity to otherwise stressful scenes. In the film adaptation, this tension is barely visible. The Hermione on screen is calm, confident, and rarely silly in her over-preparation. The nervous energy that made her funny in the books is muted. The dynamic between Hermione and Ron provided some of the richest comedy in the novels. Their constant bickering was not simply foreshadowing of future romance, but an ongoing source of light-hearted entertainment. In The Goblet of Fire, after Ron clumsily tries to ask Fleur Delacour to the Yule Ball, Hermione needles him with a smirk. "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." The irony and wounded pride in Ron's reaction made the exchange hilarious to readers. Rowling crafted these small battles with an ear for the rhythms of teenage banter. In the films, however, their disputes are streamlined. Instead of light, humorous squabbles, the arguments often feel heavier, more dramatic, and lacking the comic timing that defined their chemistry on the page. One of Hermione's most amusing qualities in the books is her complete inability to let go of being right. Her certainty in her knowledge often tips into absurdity, and Rowling plays this for laughs. In The Chamber of Secrets, when Hermione insists on brewing Polyjuice Potion, she matter-of-factly explains the complex and dangerous steps as if she were assigning homework. Ron's horrified reaction, "And what if we're caught? We're breaking about 50 school rules," is met with Hermione's dry response, "Well, that's a risk we'll have to take." The comedy lies in her tone, an earnestness so unshakable that she doesn't even see the absurdity. In the film, the same plot point appears, but Hermione's lines are delivered without that ironic edge. The screen version portrays her as heroic and rational, while the book Hermione makes readers laugh precisely because she is both brilliant and ridiculous. Even small details in the novels reveal Rowling's sense of humour through Hermione. In Order of the Phoenix, when she becomes passionate about SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare, her relentless activism turns into a running joke. She knits hats and socks, convinced that freeing house elves requires nothing more than strategically placed clothing. Rowling writes with a wink as Dobby gleefully collects all the garments, while other elves avoid the common room altogether. The absurdity of Hermione's earnest campaign creates situational comedy that makes her endearing. In the films, this subplot is erased entirely, stripping away one of the funniest and most humanizing aspects of her character. Rowling also gave Hermione a sarcastic streak that often cut through the tension of dangerous situations. In Half-Blood Prince, when Ron is ecstatic about his sudden success as keeper for the Gryffindor Quidditch team, Hermione bursts his bubble by reminding him of the luck potion Harry pretended to give him. "You didn't need luck, you had skill," Harry insists, but Hermione mutters under her breath, "or a great big serving of confidence." It is a sly, funny jab that encapsulates her ability to tease while still showing affection. In the film, the humour of this moment is softened, turning into a straightforward celebration of Ron's victory without Hermione's playful sarcasm. The nuance of her wit is lost. Another vivid example comes from the Deathly Hallows. While camping in the wilderness, Hermione's dry humour surfaces in her complaints about the dreadful conditions. When Ron laments the lack of food, Hermione replies sharply, "You wouldn't be hungry if you'd brought the bread." The line is funny because it sounds exactly like the nagging voice of reason every group of friends knows, and it lightens the grimness of their situation. In the movie adaptation, these moments are stripped of humour and replaced with a more serious, sombre tone. The Hermione on screen bears the weight of responsibility, but rarely the lighter notes of frustration that kept her book counterpart relatable. The humour of Hermione's character in the novels is often situational, born from her contradictions. She is the girl who insists on following rules but becomes the mastermind behind the most reckless rule-breaking schemes. She is the one who treats every test like a life-or-death matter, yet risks her life regularly with Harry and Ron. Rowling presents these contradictions with a wink, and the result is often comic relief. The films, however, smooth out these contradictions. The cinematic Hermione is wise, brave, and endlessly competent, but she is less funny, less awkward, and less human. Rowling's humour also relied on Hermione's timing. In The Philosopher's Stone, after the trio barely survives the Devil's Snare, Hermione indignantly declares, "Well, if you two hadn't kept panicking, we could have gotten out faster." The humour lands because Hermione herself had been paralysed with fear moments earlier. Rowling knows that irony breeds laughter, and she uses Hermione's self-seriousness to undercut her own behaviour. In the film, this sequence is altered, and Hermione is portrayed as the clear-headed saviour who remembers the solution. The comedy of her hypocrisy disappears, replaced with admiration for her competence. The books never allowed Hermione to become perfect, and this imperfection is where her humour thrived. Her tendency to lecture, to overthink, and to take herself too seriously made her both frustrating and lovable. Rowling did not hesitate to let readers laugh at her, not out of malice, but because these flaws made her real. When she sighs, "Honestly, don't you two read?" it is both a scolding and a punchline, a reminder that Hermione's exasperation is part of her charm. The films retained the scolding but left behind the punchline. Without the laugh, Hermione's personality flattened into a stereotype of brilliance. Emma Watson's portrayal brought elegance and strength to Hermione, qualities that became iconic for a generation of viewers. Yet in the process, the quirks that made Hermione so humorous in the books were subdued. Audiences admired her but did not often laugh with her. This shift speaks to a broader difference in tone. The films emphasized drama, danger, and grandeur, while Rowling's novels balanced those elements with humor and humanity. Hermione's jokes, sarcasm, and contradictions were part of that balance, and their absence in the films left a noticeable gap. Ultimately, the difference between book Hermione and film Hermione lies in the treatment of humor. Rowling knew that humor makes a character relatable, that laughter builds connection as much as admiration. In the books, Hermione was not just the cleverest witch of her age, but also the girl whose stubbornness could make readers chuckle, whose sarcastic mutters lightened dark chapters, and whose contradictions made her feel alive. On screen, she became the heroine audiences respected but rarely laughed with, and in that transformation, a vital part of her magic was lost. Number 19. Attitude toward rules. In the early pages of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Hermione Granger is presented as the strictest guardian of rules among the trio. She insists that magic be done properly, that regulations be respected, and that professors' instructions are never to be taken lightly. The reader encounters her correcting Ron's incantations, chastising Harry for wandering the castle at night, and frowning upon any attempt to bend the rules. Her words to Harry and Ron when they attempt to sneak out, "We could have all been killed, or worse, expelled," define her worldview at the beginning. For Hermione, order, safety, and structure represent security in a world where she, a Muggle-born, feels she must prove herself. The seriousness with which she clings to rules makes her transformation later in the books remarkable, but in the films this dimension is softened, and the journey from rigid discipline to moral rebellion becomes far less pronounced. One of the earliest examples of Hermione's obsession with rules appears in the first book, when she criticizes Harry and Ron after they accidentally wander into the forbidden corridor. She places the threat of expulsion above even mortal danger, a comic exaggeration that reveals how deeply she equates academic success with survival in the wizarding world. Rowling carefully develops Hermione's fear of failure, tying it to her identity as a Muggle-born who constantly feels the pressure to justify her place among pure-blood peers. This foundation makes her. Later willingness to break rules for higher purposes all the more striking. Yet in Philosopher's Stone the film portrays Hermione less as a relentless enforcer of rules and more as a clever companion who is already comfortable bending the boundaries when the plot requires it. The sharp edge of her early moral rigidity is blunted. By the time of Chamber of Secrets, Hermione's commitment to rules remains unshaken. She is the only one who takes Gilderoy Lockhart's assignment seriously, producing perfect essays while Harry and Ron mock him. She is also the mastermind behind brewing Polyjuice Potion, yet even here, Rowling emphasizes her inner conflict. Brewing such a potion is dangerous advanced magic that breaks countless school regulations. In the novel, Hermione hesitates and acknowledges the severity of their actions, but her logical mind convinces her that the risk is justified. The act becomes her first major departure from her rigid rule-following identity. The film, however, treats the event as little more than a comedic interlude, with Hermione's transformation into a cat played for laughs. The seriousness of her choice, that she is breaking a core principle of her character, is lost on screen. In Prisoner of Azkaban, the novels portray Hermione's growing maturity through her relationship with authority. She initially clings to the safety of rules, using the time turner responsibly, attending every class, and confronting Harry and Ron when she believes they are irresponsible with Buckbeak. But by the climax, she helps Harry use the time turner not for study, but to break the law, freeing Buckbeak and saving Sirius Black from a wrongful death. This moment is monumental in her character arc. Hermione finally recognizes that justice cannot always be achieved by following the rules. The book carefully builds the tension, reminding readers how much this defies her nature. The film includes the time-turner sequence, but dilutes the moral weight of Hermione's choice, framing it more as a thrilling adventure than a personal turning point. The divergence grows sharper in Goblet of Fire. In the novel, Hermione initially reacts with horror at Harry's name being drawn from the goblet, citing the rules of the Triwizard Tournament. Yet she also stands firmly by his side, recognizing that the system is corrupt. Most significantly, this is the book where she founds SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. This subplot reveals Hermione's awakening to injustices that rules themselves perpetuate. She tries to use legal methods, petitions, badges, and campaigns, but fails. Rowling uses SPEW to illustrate Hermione's first attempt at rebellion against institutional structures, and though flawed, it represents her growth from passive acceptance of authority. The films omit this entirely, erasing an essential layer of her evolution and leaving viewers with a Hermione who is merely clever and loyal, rather than one wrestling with systems of power and learning when to defy them. The events of Order of the Phoenix cement Hermione's transition from rule follower to rule breaker in the novels. Faced with Dolores Umbridge, a figure who weaponizes rules to suppress freedom, Hermione helps create Dumbledore's army. This is not simply a student club, it is an outright act of rebellion against the Ministry of Magic. For a girl who once believed that school rules were sacred, organizing secret lessons in the Room of Requirement is a staggering development. Hermione embraces risk, secrecy, and even deception, qualities she would have despised in her younger years. Rowling crafts this arc with care, contrasting Hermione's initial protests in the first book with her strategic leadership in the fifth. Yet in the film, Hermione proposes the idea of the DA with little hesitation, as if rebellion has always been natural to her. The sense of transformation is absent, and the audience is deprived of watching her hard-won moral evolution. The climax of Half-Blood Prince further reveals Hermione's nuanced relationship with rules. In the novel, she is deeply suspicious of the Half-Blood Prince's textbook, constantly warning Harry that using spells without knowing their origins is reckless. Her instincts, rooted in her respect for established knowledge, nearly clash with her loyalty to Harry. She is not wrong. The curse, Sectum Sempra, proves dangerous, and Rowling uses this tension to highlight that Hermione's caution still matters, even when she has learned to break rules in other areas. She is not reckless but discerning, choosing carefully which rules are worth breaking. The films flatten this nuance, portraying Hermione mostly as a background supporter, her warnings reduced and her moral struggle largely absent. By the time of Deathly Hallows, the novels present a Hermione who has embraced rule-breaking as a necessity for survival and justice. She modifies her parents' memories, a heartbreaking act that violates both personal and magical boundaries. She disguises the trio, breaks into the Ministry and infiltrates Gringotts, actions that earlier versions of Hermione would have condemned as criminal. Her transformation is complete. She no longer equates rules with righteousness, understanding instead that morality often demands disobedience. Rowling underscores this evolution by contrasting her early anxieties with her present resolve. In the films, however, this Hermione feels less transformed. Because she never seemed so rigid about rules in the beginning, her later defiance does not resonate as deeply. One of the most striking contrasts between book and film lies in Hermione's handling of authority figures. In the novels, she begins by idolizing professors, citing their instructions as unquestionable truth. Over time, she learns that authority can be corrupt, as with Umbridge, or even flawed, as with Dumbledore. Her decision to question authority becomes part of her maturity. In the films, Hermione often appears more skeptical from the start, challenging authority without the same hesitation. This shift removes the sense of growth, turning her from a character who evolves into a rebel into one who was always ready to rebel. The books also highlight Hermione's internal conflicts, the fear and guilt she experiences when breaking rules. Rowling frequently notes her nervousness, the way her voice trembles when lying to teachers, or how she anxiously rehearses alibis. These details matter because they show that rule-breaking is never easy for her. It is an act of courage. For instance, in Philosopher's Stone, when she lies to Professor McGonagall to protect Harry and Ron after the troll incident, she is visibly shaken. This lie is a significant step for the rule-obsessed girl. The film glosses over the emotional weight, presenting her as more confident and less conflicted, diminishing the sense of personal cost. The erasure of Hermione's relationship with rules also affects how audiences perceive her intellect. In the novels, her brilliance is not just about knowing spells, but about applying them within or against the framework of rules. She reads regulations, interprets them, and decides when to obey or subvert them. Her intelligence is tied to moral choices. The films present her cleverness more superficially, as a natural talent rather than a product of constant tension between knowledge and authority. The absence of SPEW and the dilution of DA planning make Hermione appear less like a strategist grappling with justice and more like a convenient source of magical solutions. This difference has consequences for how audiences view her bravery. In the novels, Hermione's courage is defined not by recklessness but by overcoming her fear of breaking rules. Every step away from blind obedience is an act of defiance that requires bravery equal to facing magical dangers. By the end, she is not only brave in battle but brave in thought, willing to question the structures she once upheld. The films, in softening her rigidity, unintentionally lessen the weight of her courage because rebellion is less meaningful when it comes too easily. Rowling's Hermione represents the universal struggle between conformity and justice. She embodies the idea that true morality sometimes requires disobedience, a lesson earned through years of inner conflict. Watching her evolve from the girl who feared expulsion more than death to the woman who broke into Gringotts to fight tyranny is a journey of profound transformation. The films, while capturing her loyalty and wit, miss this essential arc. By erasing her obsession with rules at the beginning, they remove the dramatic contrast that makes her later choices so powerful. The legacy of Hermione Granger in the books is therefore one of transformation, a character who learns that justice demands more than obedience. The films, by contrast, present a Hermione who is clever and bold, but lacks the narrative tension of a rule-follower turned rebel. This distinction may seem small, but it changes the way audiences understand her growth, her courage, and ultimately her humanity. It is in the novels that Hermione truly earns her place as one of the most complex and inspiring characters of the series. Number 20. Compassion and humanity. Hermione Granger in the pages of J.K. Rowling's novels is often defined by something far greater than her intelligence or her ability to master spells quicker than her classmates. She is defined by her compassion. The books show her as a character who instinctively notices those who are overlooked, mocked, or dismissed. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, when Draco Malfoy teases Neville Longbottom after he receives his Remember-All, Hermione is the one who firmly tells Neville not to listen. She speaks to him not as someone correcting his mistakes, but as someone who wants him to know he matters. This moment is small, but it speaks volumes. Hermione consistently stands beside those who are weak or vulnerable, or simply treated as if their voice does not count. It is this trait that makes her not just a brilliant witch, but a deeply human one. In the films, however, this thread is cut short. While Emma Watson's portrayal gives Hermione a strong presence, the quiet compassion is overshadowed by moments of action and cleverness. There is no scene where she bends down to encourage Neville after one of his many humiliations in class. Instead, her character is written to solve riddles, cast spells, and embody courage in a visible way. The subtle choices, the way she treats those who cannot defend themselves, disappear. This makes the film version less layered because compassion is the thread that grounds Hermione in humanity. Without it, she risks becoming only the archetype of the brightest witch of her age. One of the clearest examples of Hermione's compassion in the books comes in Prisoner of Azkaban with her dedication to Crookshanks. While many characters dismiss the Ginger Cat as trouble, Hermione defends him fiercely, especially when Ron blames Crookshanks for attacking Scabbers. She even cries in frustration at Ron's accusations, not because she cares about winning an argument, but because her pet is being unfairly judged. In the book, her words are filled with pain. "He's not a bad cat, Harry, he's really not." The films, by contrast, turn Crookshanks into little more than a background detail. We do not see Hermione defending him, comforting him, or proving her loyalty to him. What is lost is the tenderness, the sense that Hermione is capable of pouring love into small creatures that others overlook. Nowhere is Hermione's compassion more visible than in her crusade for the rights of house elves. Beginning in Goblet of Fire, she becomes the founder of SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. This subplot reveals her willingness to fight for justice even when her peers laugh at her. When she sees Winky sobbing in the kitchens after being dismissed by Mr. Crouch, she reacts with outrage, saying, "You can't call them servants if they get no pay." To Hermione, injustice against the powerless is intolerable. She knits clothes, organizes campaigns, and constantly reminds Harry and Ron that ignoring oppression is the same as condoning it. The films erase this subplot entirely. The elves appear only briefly, most memorably through Dobby, but the audience never learns of Hermione's passionate defense of them. As a result, a crucial aspect of her humanity is erased, the ability to stand up for the voiceless, even when she stands alone. It is telling that in the novels, Hermione often comforts others when no one else bothers to. After Harry has terrifying nightmares in Order of the Phoenix, Hermione urges him to talk about them, her concern palpable, even as Ron shrugs them off. She notices what Harry is going through in ways others do not, and her compassion builds bridges between them. She says, "Harry, you're not going mad, and that's the most important thing, you're not alone." It is a striking line because it demonstrates a gift for reminding people of their worth. In the films, however, such tender lines are cut. The screenwriters consistently shape her into the character who explains plot details or takes charge of spells while her emotional depth is reduced. The viewer misses her quiet role as the healer among friends. Neville Longbottom provides another clear example of this difference. In the books, Hermione frequently supports him, helping him with homework, explaining things kindly, and showing him patience. When Snape mocks Neville's incompetence in Sorcerer's Stone, Hermione whispers encouragement to him. She does not laugh at him like the rest of the class, but offers solidarity. In the films, these moments vanish. Neville is left to bumble alone, and the audience never sees the subtle kindness Hermione gives him in the novels. Stripped of this, she appears more isolated, less connected to the struggles of those around her. Her compassion extends not only to people but to values. When Harry uses the Half-Blood Prince's potion tips in Half-Blood Prince, Hermione's outrage is not born out of jealousy but concern. She worries about what it means to trust notes from a mysterious, possibly dangerous source. She warns Harry, "You don't know what that book is capable of." Her protests reveal a protective instinct. She is not interested in glory or personal success, but in Harry's safety. In the films, her objections are simplified into irritation, making her seem jealous of Harry's sudden brilliance at potions rather than deeply concerned for his well-being. Another defining moment appears in Deathly Hallows when Hermione erases her parents' memories of her existence to protect them from Voldemort. The scene in the book is told with quiet gravity. The sacrifice is devastating because it shows her love so fiercely that she is willing to cut herself out of their lives to keep them safe. This act is one of the most compassionate in the series, embodying love through loss. The films include a visual version of this scene, but they present it quickly, almost like a passing montage, without the weight of her anguish or the explanation of why this act is monumental. The depth of her humanity, the willingness to endure loneliness for the sake of others, is not fully captured. The omission of SPEW in the films has wider consequences than many notice. Without it, Hermione loses her defining role as a character who fights for justice on a broader scale. She becomes primarily Harry's ally, rather than a fighter for those who have no voice. The novels show her thinking beyond her own circle, stretching her compassion to groups others ignore. She fights not for recognition but for principle, which adds extraordinary depth to her character. The films flatten this arc into cleverness and bravery, but not empathy. Consider also how Hermione responds to Ron's cruelty during their fights. In the books, when Ron mocks her about her concern for the elves or dismisses her efforts, Hermione is wounded but continues to stand by her values. Her persistence shows that her compassion is not a passing trait but a conviction. She does not abandon the weak simply because her friends find it embarrassing. This strength of character is absent in the films, where Ron and Hermione's relationship is reduced to bickering and awkward humor. Her values are not explored, and the viewer misses the richness of her inner life. The books also allow us to see Hermione's compassion in her relationship with Harry. She is often the first to see through his anger and frustration, offering him grounding when others misunderstand him. After Harry's disastrous interview in Order of the Phoenix with Rita Skeeter, Hermione strategizes not for glory but to help him reclaim his voice. She insists that the truth must be heard because Harry deserves justice. Her compassion takes the form of action, not words alone. In the films, this is condensed and the emphasis shifts to Harry's own actions, leaving Hermione's role in defending his humanity underexplored. Even in small details, the difference is clear. In the books, Hermione spends time knitting hats for elves, comforting Lavender after Ron's coldness, and helping Hagrid with his classes when others ridicule him. Each of these acts may seem minor, but together they form a mosaic of who Hermione truly is, someone who sees pain and cannot ignore it. In the films, these gestures disappear, leaving behind a sharper, more action-oriented Hermione, but one whose heart is less visible. Hermione's compassion is also what makes her flaws forgivable. She can be bossy, she can nag, and she often insists she is right. Yet in the books, these traits are softened by the knowledge that they spring from care. She nags Neville because she wants him to succeed. She criticizes Harry because she wants him safe. She organizes SPEW because she cannot stand injustice. Her flaws are rooted in her empathy, making her complex and deeply human. The films, without this context, sometimes portray her as merely exasperated or superior, losing the warmth that underlies her sharpness. In the end, Hermione's compassion in the novels is not simply an additional detail. It is her defining trait, the quality that separates her from being just another clever witch. Her willingness to fight for Neville, for Crookshanks, for house elves, for Harry, for her parents, for truth and justice, makes her a mirror of the best qualities of humanity. The films, by neglecting this side of her character, present her as heroic, yes, but not as human as she truly is. What is lost is not just detail, but the essence of who Hermione Granger was meant to be. A reminder that brilliance is incomplete without kindness, and that true strength is measured not in spells cast, but in compassion offered. Number 21, Emotions and Inner World. Hermione Granger in the books is not only the brightest witch of her age, but also a girl who lives and feels with her whole being. Her emotions are never hidden, and J.K. Rowling allows us to see her vulnerability. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, one of the most telling moments is the aftermath of the Yule Ball. Hermione arrives with Victor Crumb, proud to be seen not as the bookish know-it-all, but as a young woman noticed by others. Yet Ron, unable to handle his jealousy, lashes out cruelly. The book tells us that Hermione leaves in tears, sobbing and shouting at Ron, "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort." This sentence reveals not only her pain, but her desire to be respected and valued. It is a pivotal glimpse into Hermione's inner life. She wants recognition beyond her intellect, and the tears streaming down her face show that her heart is just as fragile as anyone else's. In the film, the same event is muted. Emma Watson portrays frustration and anger, but the camera does not linger on Hermione's tears or her heartbreak. What is left is the impression of a sharp-tongued but controlled girl, not the wounded teenager Rowling described. Another striking difference between book and film, Hermione lies in the first major clash among the trio in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. In the book, Hermione is stretched thin by her time-turner schedule, overworked, and alone in her concern for Harry's safety with the firebolt. When she tells Professor McGonagall that Harry should not be allowed to keep the broom, Harry and Ron turn their backs on her. Rowling paints the scene with painful strokes. Hermione's face crumples, she cries in the common room, and the tension among friends is almost unbearable. Hermione flung her arms around Harry's neck and broke down completely. Harry, looking around the room to make sure they were alone, patted her very awkwardly on the top of the head. This shows her desperation for reconciliation and her emotional honesty. In Alfonso Cuarón's film, the conflict is smoothed over, with Hermione depicted as quietly withdrawn rather than openly crying. The sense of loneliness, the need for acceptance, and the courage it takes to stand by her beliefs, even when it costs her friends, are diminished on screen. In Chamber of Secrets, Hermione's petrification is another example of emotional resonance in the books that feels reduced in the adaptation. While unconscious on the hospital bed, she still becomes a powerful, emotional anchor for Harry and Ron. Rowling shows how her absence leaves a void in their days, and Harry admits to missing her voice and presence. Ron, who often bickers with her, suddenly feels protective and guilty. When she wakes, the reunion is described with joy, laughter, and a rush of relief. The books remind us that Hermione is the emotional glue of the trio. In Chris Columbus's film, the scene is brief. Hermione enters the Great Hall and hugs Harry, but her hug with Ron is reduced to a hesitant handshake. The rich tapestry of friendship, affection, and reconciliation that Rowling gave her is flattened into a lighter, almost comical beat, robbing Hermione of a key emotional triumph. Rowling also uses Hermione's emotions to highlight her moral compass. In Order of the Phoenix, when Professor Umbridge punishes Harry with the blood quill, Hermione's reaction is full of pain and outrage. She trembles with anger when she discovers what Umbridge has done, and her eyes fill with tears at the injustice. "You're writing with your own blood," she whispers, horrified. Her compassion and fury remind readers that she is not simply a strategist, but a deeply empathetic girl who feels for her friends. In David Yates's film adaptation, the scene is tightened, and Hermione's outrage is present, but she remains composed. The trembling hands, the moist eyes, the barely contained grief are missing, replaced by a calmer indignation. As a result, the cinematic Hermione seems more detached, less visibly shaken by cruelty, while the book version resonates with raw emotion. The books also emphasize Hermione's insecurities. Despite her brilliance, she fears rejection. In Philosopher's Stone, she overhears Ron calling her a nightmare, and Rowling shows us her emotional collapse. Hermione hides in the bathroom, crying her heart out, and is only saved from the troll attack because of her tears. The narration does not shy away from the humiliation and loneliness she feels. Rowling writes that Hermione burst into tears and fled. Words that remind readers that even the smartest student can feel deeply wounded by careless words. In the film, this moment is shortened, and the viewer sees Hermione upset but not broken. The raw pain of being excluded and insulted, the sobbing that makes her hide away, are softened, leaving less of an impression of her vulnerability. Her emotional warmth is also one of her defining traits in the books. In Deathly Hallows, when Ron deserts Harry and Hermione in the tent, the depth of her grief is heartbreaking. Rowling describes her as sobbing nightly, her sobs muffled by the sound of the river, unable to stop herself from crying. Harry notices her silent suffering, and the description etches into the reader's mind that Hermione's loyalty has been wounded. She clings to her friendship, yet Ron's departure cuts her deeply. This is not the stoic warrior of the films, but a young woman struggling to keep herself together in unbearable loneliness. In the movie, Hermione is sad, but her grief is portrayed with more restraint. The quiet tears by the fire are touching, but the ongoing despair, the raw devastation that continues night after night, is never fully conveyed. Even Hermione's joy is sharper in the books. In Half-Blood Prince, when Ron finally acknowledges her importance after nearly dying from poisoning, Hermione's face is described as glowing with happiness. Rowling captures her relief and affection, hinting at the undercurrent of feelings she has harbored for Ron. Her emotions move from fear to warmth in a few pages, showing her capacity for love and care. In the film, the same moment is brushed aside. Emma Watson plays the scene with a gentle smile, but the richness of Hermione's heart, the trembling hands, the overwhelming relief, are absent. The audience is left with a smaller gesture instead of the storm of feelings Rowling gave her. Her jealousy is also vivid in the books. In Half-Blood Prince, when Ron begins dating Lavender Brown, Hermione reacts with hurt, anger, and pride. She conjures birds that attack Ron, then hides in the girl's bathroom to cry. Rowling writes, her face was shining with tears, her expression wild. The reader feels her torment. The girl who always appeared so composed is breaking inside because love has made her vulnerable. The film reduces this to a brief scene of annoyance, with Hermione angry but restrained. The wildness, the uncontrolled sobbing, the passion, and the vulnerability are stripped away, leaving her more composed than she ever was in the books. The books also show Hermione's tenderness in small gestures. She knits hats for house elves, cries over Hagrid's dangerous lessons when they put him at risk, and fights passionately for what she believes is just. Rowling often writes her as trembling, tearful, or flushed with anger when defending those who cannot defend themselves. The films present her campaigns like SPEW as comic relief or leave them out altogether, reducing the scope of her emotional activism. The depth of her compassion is thus dimmed on screen, where she appears more pragmatic and less heart-driven. Another book moment that highlights her emotions is in Goblet of Fire, when Harry faces the first task with the dragon. Hermione hugs him tightly, tears in her eyes, terrified for his safety. Rowling allows us to feel her fear and her courage in expressing it. "Harry, you were so brave!" she cries afterward, with her face still wet from crying. In the movie, Emma Watson's Hermione looks worried but composed, clapping after Harry's success. The wet cheeks and trembling voice are gone, leaving a Hermione who seems supportive, but not deeply shaken. Even in light-hearted moments, Hermione's emotional openness is crucial. When she attends the Yule Ball, Rowling makes her shine not only in beauty but in happiness. She laughs, dances, and beams with joy, allowing the reader to see her girlish excitement. Yet the film captures her beauty, but tones down the joy. Emma Watson glides across the dance floor gracefully, but the effusive laughter, the sparkling eyes described in the book, are subdued, making her seem more elegant but less emotionally alive. The contrast continues in the climax of Deathly Hallows during the Battle of Hogwarts. When Harry is thought dead, Rowling describes Hermione as breaking down, her sobs mingling with the screams of others. She clutches Ron, her grief pouring out. Her faith is shattered in that moment, her emotions laid bare. The film shows her shocked, but relatively quiet. The overwhelming despair Rowling wrote is transformed into silent tears, lessening the raw emotional devastation of losing Harry. Throughout the books, Hermione's inner world is conveyed with meticulous attention to emotion. Rowling uses trembling voices, flushed cheeks, tears, and shouting to remind readers that Hermione is a girl whose heart often leads her decisions. She argues with her friends, bursts into tears, or hugs them tightly, always wearing her heart on her sleeve. On film, however, this portrait is reshaped into a more controlled, elegant figure. Emma Watson plays Hermione as intelligent, confident, and brave, but the emotional chaos of adolescence, the nights of crying, the desperate arguments, are muted. What remains is a character who is admirable but less human. This difference matters because it changes how audiences perceive her. In the books, readers grow up with a Hermione who makes mistakes, who cries, who sometimes loses control, and in doing so she becomes profoundly relatable. Her vulnerability makes her victories sweeter and her friendships deeper. In the films, however, she is polished, consistently confident, and emotionally restrained. While this makes her an inspiring heroine, it takes away the messy, painful, and beautiful humanity that Rowling wove into her every page. Hermione Granger in the books is not only the cleverest witch, but also one of the most emotionally complex characters, and it is that inner life that keeps readers holding on to her long after the final chapter. Number 22, Hermione's legacy. Hermione Granger's legacy in the Harry Potter universe is one of resilience, intellect, and moral conviction, but how that legacy is portrayed differs drastically between J.K. Rowling's books and the cinematic adaptations. In the books, Hermione is carefully constructed as someone who grows into a force capable of shaping the wizarding world, from her very first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, where she asserts books and cleverness. There are more important things, friendship and bravery. The seeds of her larger role are planted. This is not just a precocious child correcting her peers, but a young girl discovering that her mind, while formidable, is only part of her power. Her courage and commitment to justice ultimately become her defining traits. In contrast, the films streamline her arc, often reducing her to a flawless supporting character, someone indispensable to Harry, yet not positioned with the same independence or political potential that the novels emphasize. In Rowling's texts, Hermione's moral compass is one of her greatest strengths. The Goblet of Fire showcases this when she initiates SPEW, the Society for the Promotion of Elfish Welfare. It is easy for readers to laugh at the almost comic obsession she develops, knitting socks and attempting to liberate house elves who are not exactly interested in being liberated. Yet this storyline is crucial. It illustrates her capacity to care about systemic injustice long before her peers or even her teachers. It may seem naive, but this naivete is the spark of a revolutionary spirit. Rowling makes clear that Hermione is not satisfied with the world as it is. She wants to reshape it into something better. In the films, this subplot is erased entirely, and with it, a significant cornerstone of her political consciousness disappears. Without SPEW, cinematic Hermione lacks the ideological drive that positions her, in the books, as a natural reformer destined for leadership. The textual Hermione also demonstrates a willingness to confront authority, something that aligns her closely with Harry, yet remains distinctly her own. In Order of the Phoenix, she repeatedly challenges Dolores Umbridge, not through reckless defiance, but through calculated resistance. She is the one who conceives the idea of Dumbledore's army, convincing Harry that his leadership is necessary and providing the organizational skills to make it real. Rowling describes her insistence. "You don't have to do this alone. We can fight back, and we must." Hermione here is not simply following Harry's lead, but pushing him toward becoming a leader. Her role is almost Machiavellian, not in the sense of manipulation, but in her understanding that revolutions require both visionaries and organizers. The films, while including the DA storyline, shift much of the focus onto Harry's heroism, showing Hermione as efficient and brave, but not quite the driving strategist she is in the books. Even the darker moments reveal how Hermione's legacy takes shape in the written story. In Deathly Hallows, her decision to alter her parents' memories to protect them is one of the most haunting acts of sacrifice in the entire series. Rowling paints the scene with a chilling detachment. She whispered, "Obliviate," and her parents became strangers. Here is Hermione not as the clever schoolgirl, but as a young woman willing to sever her ties to family for the sake of the larger war against Voldemort. It is an act of courage laced with tragedy, showing her resolve to fight injustice at the cost of her personal happiness. The films touch this moment only briefly, almost without context, reducing its emotional weight. By underplaying it, they obscure the enormous personal sacrifice that solidifies Hermione's role as someone whose choices shape the destiny of the wizarding world. Rowling's Hermione is also humanized by her flaws, which paradoxically strengthen her arc as a leader in the making. Her obsession with academics, her occasional arrogance, and her tendency to impose her ideas on others are qualities that evolve into maturity. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when she buys Crookshanks despite Ron's protests, she demonstrates stubbornness and independence, unwilling to bow to peer pressure. Later, her decision to punch Draco Malfoy after he mocks Hagrid is not an intellectual reaction, but an emotional, human one. "You foul, loathsome, evil little cockroach," she shouts before striking him. These imperfections make her growth into a measured political figure believable. By contrast, in the films, she is often presented as near-perfect, calm, rational, endlessly competent, and rarely wrong. This cinematic idealization removes the texture of her humanity, and without flaws, her eventual political achievements seem less like the result of growth and more like inevitability. The epilogue of the books confirms what the narrative has long foreshadowed. Hermione becomes a successful politician. Rowling later elaborated that she worked at the Ministry of Magic, first in the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, where she continued her fight for house elf rights, and later as Minister for Magic itself. This career path is the natural extension of everything we have seen: her determination, her commitment to justice, her courage to stand against corrupt authority. The films, however, leave this dimension unspoken. While we see her married to Ron and sending her children off to Hogwarts, the cinematic Hermione's political destiny is not even hinted at. The audience is left with the impression that her life is defined primarily by her role as wife and mother, not as a reformer and leader. This silence diminishes the scale of her legacy. Another critical difference lies in how the two mediums portray her relationships. In the books, Hermione's bond with Harry is deep but not romantic, emphasizing loyalty and mutual respect. She is the one who keeps him grounded, reminding him of his responsibilities when despair threatens to overwhelm him. In Deathly Hallows, when Harry doubts their mission, Hermione's words cut through. "Well, keep going, Harry. We're with you, whatever happens." She is his equal in determination. In the films, however, the camera lingers on moments that suggest an intimacy bordering on romantic tension, such as the dance scene between Harry and Hermione in Deathly Hallows, Part 1. While emotionally powerful, these creative choices shift the perception of her role, framing her more as Harry's emotional anchor than as an independent ideological force. The omission of SPEW and the de-emphasis of Hermione's political ideals in the films also impact how younger audiences perceive her legacy. Readers of the books encounter a heroine who not only supports the protagonist but also defines her own mission: justice for the oppressed, fairness in governance, and the courage to enact change. Viewers of the films encounter a heroine who is brilliant, brave, and loyal, but whose battles are largely Harry's battles. In cinematic memory, Hermione is remembered as Harry's best friend, whereas in literary memory, she is remembered as the architect of her own revolution. This difference is evident in how fans discuss her character. Book readers often cite her activism and eventual leadership, quoting lines like, "I'm hoping to do some good in the world," a statement she makes in Half-Blood Prince when reflecting on her future. This single line foreshadows her political career. Movie-only fans, however, recall her clever spells, her quick thinking in dangerous situations, or her loyalty to Harry and Ron. The film legacy narrows her influence, situating her in the shadow of the protagonist, whereas the book legacy elevates her into her own spotlight. One might argue that film adaptations, limited by time and narrative constraints, had to simplify Hermione's arc. Yet these omissions are not neutral choices, they reshape the meaning of her character. In storytelling, what is left unsaid can be as powerful as what is shown. By removing SPEW, softening her conflicts with authority, and erasing her epilogue achievements, the films create a Hermione who is indispensable in battle but not necessarily a reformer of society. The reader sees a world where Hermione's activism ripples into the future, changing laws and traditions. The viewer sees a world where Hermione's legacy ends at the Battle of Hogwarts. The strength of Hermione's literary arc also lies in how she complements and contrasts Harry and Ron. In Philosopher's Stone, Ron provides humour and instinct, Harry provides courage and destiny, but Hermione provides foresight and principle. This dynamic continues through every book, with her often being the one who transforms moments of crisis into opportunities for growth. Without her, Harry would not have survived the Devil's Snare, navigated the Triwizard Tournament, or planned the Horcrux hunt. The films preserve many of these moments, but by focusing less on her ideological vision, they present her as reactive rather than proactive. She saves lives, yes, but she does not appear to reshape futures. It is telling that Rowling herself once said Hermione was the most like me among her characters. The books show this personal imprint clearly. Hermione is the advocate, the organizer, the reformer, the thinker who refuses to accept tradition when it conflicts with justice. She is the one who grows into the kind of leader Rowling herself might have aspired to be. The films, by contrast, highlight her brilliance and loyalty but mute her transformation into a political actor. They preserve the friend but diminish the leader. When fans return to the books, they rediscover the Hermione who was always meant to outgrow the narrative of the clever friend. She becomes a reminder that intelligence must be paired with moral conviction, that bravery must extend beyond the battlefield into the realm of ideas and governance. Her legacy in the novels is that of a young woman who fought not only Voldemort, but the very prejudices and injustices that made his rise possible. Her legacy in the films, while still admirable, is softer. Bravery without politics, loyalty without revolution, heroism without transformation. Number 23. Hermione and the Teachers. Hermione Granger's relationship with her teachers in the books is one of the most revealing aspects of her character, because it demonstrates not just her intelligence, but her independence and her ability to think critically even in the face of authority. The novels show that she deeply respects Professor McGonagall, and yet this respect is not blind obedience. McGonagall sees in Hermione a kindred spirit of discipline and hard work, praising her often for her academic brilliance. In Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, McGonagall's sharp acknowledgement of Hermione's talent during Transfiguration class, Miss Granger is a very bright pupil, illustrates that the respect between them is mutual. This bond paints Hermione as more than a bookish child. She is a student who thrives under teachers who value rigor and precision. The films, however, flatten this dynamic. They present McGonagall as a stern but benevolent authority, and Hermione as a model pupil who follows rules without question, missing the richer depiction of Hermione's intellectual rapport with her head of house. The novels also highlight Hermione's more complicated interactions with Professor Snape, which are central to understanding her courage and resilience. Snape belittles her frequently, calling her an insufferable know-it-all in Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban after she answers too many questions. This moment is important because it shows how Hermione is not just academically successful but also willing to endure humiliation in pursuit of knowledge. Harry and Ron feel indignant at Snape's cruelty, yet Hermione does not allow the insult to silence her. She continues to speak up in class, determined to prove her mastery. This tension with Snape defines her spirit as someone who will not bend under pressure. The films, however, reduce this conflict to a single scene where Ron defends her after Snape mocks her, and the nuance of Hermione's persistence, her quiet defiance, is lost. A particularly striking relationship in the books is between Hermione and Professor Lupin. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Lupin teaches defense against the dark arts with kindness and clarity, and Hermione responds with admiration that is not clouded by fear or doubt. When Lupin introduces the boggart, Hermione does not shy away. She wants to learn, to engage, to push her boundaries. After class, she is one of the few who continues to seek his guidance, recognizing in him a teacher who values the balance of intellect and empathy. The text describes how she looked at him with great admiration, a detail absent in the films, where their interactions are limited to the boggart scene and then dissolve into the background. This neglect diminishes the sense that Hermione's growth as a witch was deeply influenced by teachers who encouraged her mind and heart alike. Hermione's interactions with Professor Trelawney provide perhaps the clearest example of the difference between book and film portrayals. In Prisoner of Azkaban, Hermione openly dismisses divination as nonsense, famously declaring, "This is such a waste of time." Her disdain grows until she storms out of the classroom and drops the subject entirely. This defiance is critical because it demonstrates her refusal to accept authority when it contradicts her rational mind. She does not care that Trelawney is an established professor. Hermione cannot reconcile herself with vague predictions and theatrical pronouncements. The films, however, soften this confrontation. While she does roll her eyes at Trelawney's lessons, her departure from the subject is depicted without drama, almost as if it were a quiet academic choice rather than an act of open rebellion. By stripping away the conflict, the films erase one of Hermione's boldest acts of intellectual independence. Another subtle but important relationship in the books is Hermione's attitude toward Professor Dumbledore. She reveres him, yet her reverence is not passive. In Goblet of Fire, when Dumbledore seems reluctant to confront the possibility of Voldemort's return, Hermione quietly insists on the importance of preparing and gathering knowledge. She trusts his wisdom but still questions decisions, showing her capacity for independent thought even under a leader she admires. In the films, her voice is subdued. She is presented as a loyal supporter of Harry and Dumbledore, without the sharper edge of inquiry that the books emphasize. This distinction matters because it shows that Hermione in the novels is not afraid to weigh even Dumbledore's judgment against her own sense of reason. One of the more overlooked teaching relationships in the books is with Professor Sprout. While Hermione never displays overt adoration for herbology, she respects Sprout's practical wisdom and diligence. In Chamber of Secrets, she quickly takes note of the mandrake's properties and later uses this knowledge to help solve the mystery of the petrified students. The narrative shows Hermione not only absorbing information but valuing the professor's expertise. In the films, however, Sprout is barely visible, appearing briefly in the Mandrake scene and vanishing from Hermione's storyline. The potential to show Hermione's broad respect for knowledge, even in less glamorous subjects, is lost. Professor Hagrid is another case where the books show Hermione's complexity as a student. Although she deeply cares for Hagrid, she does not hesitate to correct him or challenge his sometimes dangerous ideas about magical creatures. In Prisoner of Azkaban, when Hagrid insists on teaching about hippogriffs, Hermione urges caution and tries to help him structure the class safely. Her concern is both for the animals and for the students, revealing her instinct to mediate between compassion and reason. The films reduce this relationship to light-hearted moments of friendship missing. The subtler aspect of Hermione acting almost as a voice of reason for Hagrid's well-meaning but reckless teaching style. Even with Professor Slughorn, whom she encounters in Half-Blood Prince, Hermione's book Self stands out as more nuanced than her film portrayal. She recognizes Slughorn's favoritism and charm, yet she sees through it, understanding that his interest in famous or talented students is strategic. Hermione plays along but never loses her critical distance. In the films, this nuance is diluted. She is portrayed as another member of his select slug club, without any suggestion that she is analyzing the dynamics of power behind his invitations. The omission reduces her ability to navigate politics in the academic world, something the books emphasize as part of her growing maturity. The novels also highlight moments when Hermione's knowledge outpaces her teachers, which the films rarely acknowledge. In Order of the Phoenix, she challenges Umbridge in class, insisting that practical defense spells must be taught, not just theory. She states boldly, "You can't call that a defense against the dark arts lesson." This confrontation is pivotal because it shows Hermione's moral courage in addition to intellectual strength. She risks punishment to stand for what is right. The film version tones this down, allowing Harry to be the main challenger while Hermione looks on. This creative choice erases her role as a moral compass among the students, reducing her to a supportive figure rather than an active leader. Hermione's clashes with Umbridge extend beyond the classroom in the books. She becomes a strategist, helping Harry organize Dumbledore's army, showing that she has learned not only from supportive teachers like Lupin, but also from corrupt ones like Umbridge, who taught her what true authority should not look like. In the books, this dynamic underscores how Hermione integrates every teaching experience into her worldview, whether positive or negative. In the films, however, these layers are minimized, leaving only the impression of Hermione as a follower of Harry's lead rather than as the one who often conceived the plans. Her relationship with Madame Hooch, while brief, also demonstrates her resilience. In Sorcerer's Stone, when she struggles with flying lessons, Hermione does not give up, but studies techniques and observes others carefully. Her determination to master even the skills that do not come naturally to her reflects her respect for every teacher, even those she does not admire. The films reduce Hooch to a single early scene, and Hermione's growth in this area disappears entirely, simplifying her image into that of an effortless achiever, rather than a girl who fought for every skill she gained. Another fascinating detail in the novels is how Hermione interacts with teachers outside the classroom. She approaches professors with questions, debates them, and even corrects them at times. In Prisoner of Azkaban, she presses Professor Vector on complex arithmancy concepts, showing her drive to pursue knowledge beyond the syllabus. These small but telling details build a portrait of Hermione as someone whose relationship with her teachers is dynamic and interactive. The films, however, strip these encounters away, showing Hermione primarily in the company of Harry and Ron, making her appear less academically engaged and more socially centered than she is in the books. What is consistent across all of Hermione's teacher relationships in the novels is her unwillingness to accept information uncritically. Whether it is her skepticism of Trelawney, her defense of practical magic against Umbridge, or her analysis of Slughorn's motives, Hermione consistently demonstrates that knowledge must be questioned, tested, and earned. The films reduce her to a diligent student who rarely pushes back, presenting her as flawless rather than complex. This shift diminishes one of the key aspects of her character, her independence of thought. By removing her conflicts with teachers, the films transform Hermione into an idealized pupil rather than a young woman forging her own intellectual path. The difference between book and film depictions of Hermione's relationships with teachers is not just a matter of detail, but of character philosophy. The books present her as someone who values authority but does not worship it, who respects teachers but is willing to challenge them, and who learns both from their wisdom and their flaws. The films, in their simplification, miss this richness, showing Hermione as polished and nearly perfect but ultimately less human. It is in her debates, her arguments, her defiance, and her admiration that we see the true Hermione Granger, a student who was never merely a student, but a thinker destined to grow into a leader. Number 24. Hermione and Hufflepuff qualities. Under the soft candlelight of the Great Hall, the sorting hat placed on Hermione Granger's head whispered about choices. Readers of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone remember the crucial moment when the hat considered Ravenclaw, praising her intelligence, but ultimately acknowledged her bravery. What often goes unnoticed, however, is that Hermione also embodied traits of Hufflepuff: loyalty, tireless work, and a relentless pursuit of fairness. J.K. Rowling carefully scattered these traits across the pages, letting her grow into someone much more complex than the bold Gryffindor girl the films chose to portray. By erasing those subtler qualities, the adaptations narrowed Hermione into a symbol of courage rather than a character who carried the heart of multiple houses. Her laborious nature shines as early as the first year. While Harry and Ron struggled with their essays, Hermione always handed in work that went far beyond the requirement. She read Hogwarts, a history cover to cover, before stepping foot in the castle, memorizing spells in advance, and volunteering in classes with an eagerness that seemed less about showing off and more about her love for learning. In the books, this is not arrogance. It is her sense of responsibility. Hufflepuff values hard work above all, and Hermione demonstrates it consistently. One cannot read her frantic revision schedules in Prisoner of Azkaban when she used the time turner to attend every class without seeing a portrait of almost obsessive diligence. The films, however, translated this into a neat trope, the know-it-all Gryffindor erasing the depth behind her effort. Loyalty, another Hufflepuff hallmark, echoes throughout Hermione's story. She stands by Harry even when the entire school labels him a liar in Goblet of Fire. She supports Ron despite his insecurities, even when he lashes out. Her care for house elves in Order of the Phoenix reflects a loyalty that extends beyond friends to those society ignores. In the books, her creation of SPEW may seem naive, but it springs from that profound commitment to justice and fairness that Hufflepuff House represents. "You know, house elves get a very raw deal," she exclaims in the fourth book, and Rowling makes sure the reader understands this is not an easy cause, but one she clings to anyway. Yet the films strip this subplot entirely, leaving behind a Hermione whose devotion appears only when tethered to Harry's immediate struggles, not the broader injustices of the magical world. Rowling also shows Hermione as someone who values fairness in a way that resonates strongly with Hufflepuff. In Chamber of Secrets, she is petrified while searching for the truth about the monster in the castle, clutching the page about basilisks. She was risking everything not for glory, but to protect others, especially the vulnerable Muggle-born students. Later, in Half-Blood Prince, her frustration over Harry's use of the Prince's Potions book stems from a moral conviction that shortcuts and unfair advantages are wrong. She is not merely jealous of his success, she believes in justice as a guiding principle. The films reduce this into bickering, often portraying her as jealous or controlling rather than principled. What the books show as an ethical Hufflepuff trait becomes, on-screen, a simplified personality flaw. The sorting hat's hesitation in the books between Ravenclaw and Gryffindor adds another layer to Hermione's complexity. "You could be great in Ravenclaw. It's all here in your head," the hat whispers in Philosopher's Stone. But Hermione's qualities are not neatly boxed. She is brilliant enough for Ravenclaw, hard-working and loyal enough for Hufflepuff, yet her bravery tips the scale. Rowling makes it clear that the hat does not deny the existence of those other traits. It simply identifies what would define her path. The films, in contrast, never communicate this nuance. From the moment Emma Watson's Hermione appears, she is framed as a Gryffindor archetype, courageous, sharp-tongued, and almost one-dimensional in her certainty. The internal debate, the richness of her character, vanishes in favor of narrative clarity. This simplification becomes stark when comparing specific scenes. In Prisoner of Azkaban book, Hermione slaps Malfoy across the face after he mocks Hagrid, and Buckbeak, a moment of impulsive bravery rooted in loyalty to her friend. The film includes the slap, but it plays more as comic relief than as a testament to her protective nature. In the book, the weight of Hufflepuff loyalty is evident. Hermione defends the dignity of others fiercely. In the film, the same moment reduces her to a fiery sidekick whose actions exist to elicit cheers from the audience rather than reveal character depth. Another telling example comes in Goblet of Fire. The Yule Ball sequence in the novel emphasizes Hermione's vulnerability, her desire to be seen beyond her intelligence, and her disappointment with Ron's jealousy. This complexity is interlaced with her Hufflepuff side. She wants fairness in how she is valued as a girl, and not just as a walking encyclopedia. "Next time there's a ball, ask me before someone else does, and not as a last resort," she tells Ron. The book allows readers to feel her pain, her longing for equality. The film reduces the scene into a brief quarrel, played with exaggerated melodrama, stripping away the quiet dignity that Rowling intended. By ignoring the Hufflepuff traits in Hermione, the films also weaken her role as a moral compass. In the books, she often reminds Harry and Ron about the right course of action, not out of superiority, but from a grounded sense of fairness. Her outrage at Rita Skeeter's lies, her compassion for Neville, and her persistence in helping Hagrid during his trial all reflect the ethics of someone who might have thrived in Hufflepuff. Yet the cinematic Hermione is framed as brilliant but bossy, brave but brittle. The reduction diminishes the moral weight Rowling entrusted to her. Even in Deathly Hallows, book Hermione continues to embody Hufflepuff qualities in ways the films ignore. Her careful preparation for the trio's journey, the enchanted bag, the healing supplies, the thought of food and shelter, reflects diligence and foresight. She is not reckless but methodical, another hallmark of hard work. Her loyalty to Harry is unwavering even when Ron abandons them. "I'll go with you," she says simply, when Harry insists he must leave Privet Drive for the last time. It is not grandiose bravery but quiet commitment, the kind of courage rooted in faithfulness. The films, however, highlight only the dramatic moments, such as her torture at Malfoy Manor, without showing the steady loyalty that defines her in the books. The erasure of these traits also impacts how young audiences perceive her. Book Hermione inspires not just admiration for her courage, but also recognition of the value of effort and fairness. She shows readers that one can be brilliant without arrogance, hard-working without recognition, loyal without condition. The film's Hermione, while still admirable, becomes a narrower role model, the clever Gryffindor who solves problems with wit and bravery. The subtle lesson about Hufflepuff virtues disappears, leaving audiences with a diminished version of what Rowling intended. Rowling herself often emphasized the importance of Hufflepuff. In interviews, she described it as the house of quiet strength, the unsung heroes. By writing Hermione with these qualities, she wove Hufflepuff's spirit into the central trio, balancing Harry's destined courage and Ron's familial loyalty. But the film's decision to sideline this complexity reflects a broader trend, simplifying characters to fit cinematic archetypes. The screen demanded heroes and comic relief, not layered personalities. Thus, Hermione became the perfect Gryffindor, and her Hufflepuff heart was left on the cutting room floor. The tension between book and film versions becomes even more pronounced when examining how readers versus viewers interpret her. Readers often debate whether Hermione would have thrived in Ravenclaw or Hufflepuff. Viewers rarely entertain the question because the films never present it. Emma Watson's performance, while earnest, was framed by a script that placed Hermione in a single category. Without SPEW, without her obsessive revision, without her ethical arguments, there is no foundation for the audience to see her as anything but the quintessential Gryffindor. The result is a loss of richness that only those who delve into the books can fully appreciate. What makes this omission so striking is that it robs the story of its central theme, choice. The Sorting Hat tells Harry in Philosopher's Stone, "It is our choices, Harry, that show what we truly are, far more than our abilities." Hermione's choice to embrace bravery, despite possessing other qualities, reflects this lesson. By narrowing her depiction, the films reduce that message. They show her as destined for Gryffindor, rather than as someone who could have belonged elsewhere, but chose courage. In the books, readers see her multidimensionality, the way she contains the best of several houses. In the films, she is simplified into one identity, as if bravery were her only story. The deeper tragedy of this simplification is how it affects our understanding of friendship within the trio. In the books, Hermione balances Harry's impulsive courage and Ron's wavering confidence with her diligence and loyalty. Her Hufflepuff qualities make her the anchor, the one who steadies the group when tempers flare. Without those dimensions, the films reduce her role to problem solver, the brain of the operation. She still matters, but she matters differently. Less as a friend with layers, more as a device to move the plot forward. Rowling's Hermione is a girl of three houses, but the screen left us with only one. Number 25, Hermione and Rita Skeeter. Hermione Granger's relationship with Rita Skeeter in the books is one of the most fascinating threads in her character arc, and it is one that shows just how far she is willing to go when she believes that truth and justice are being compromised. J.K. Rowling gives us not just a young witch who is academically brilliant, but also one who learns to use cunning, resourcefulness, and even ruthlessness when the situation calls for it. Yet in the films, this entire subplot vanishes, leaving Hermione's sharp edges smoothed away and denying her one of her most mature victories. The absence is striking because the Hermione of the books is not only a symbol of morality, but also someone who knows how to fight dirty when the stakes are high, and Rita Skeeter becomes the perfect canvas upon which these qualities are painted. In Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Rita Skeeter's articles in the Daily Prophet cut deeply into the lives of the main characters. She writes lurid half-true accounts of Harry's supposed emotional instability, sensationalized pieces about Hagrid's half-giant heritage, and cruel exaggerations of Hermione's friendship with both Harry and Victor Crumb. In the book, Skeeter's pen is not harmless. It damages reputations, spreads lies, and manipulates public opinion. For Hermione, who has always believed in truth and fairness, this was an unforgivable offense. When Rita paints her as Harry Potter's girlfriend, toying with the affections of international Quidditch star Victor Crumb, the young witch becomes the target of hate mail, including a cursed letter that leaves her hands covered in boils. Hermione's anger in these chapters is palpable, and her decision to fight back is not the response of a child, but of a strategist. The moment Hermione begins to suspect Rita Skeeter's methods, the tone of her character shifts. Rowling allows us to see a mind working behind the scenes, piecing together clues with precision. Hermione notices that Skeeter always seems to have access to private conversations, whether it is Hagrid confiding his secret in a hut or Harry and Ron speaking in quiet corners of the castle. Then she connects the dots with Skeeter's absence from the Daily Prophet office during key events and the mysterious beetle that seems to show up wherever they go. This is the Hermione who goes beyond textbooks and exams. This is the Hermione who is capable of thinking like a chess player, always anticipating her opponent's next move, When the revelation finally arrives, it feels like the climax of a detective story. Hermione captures Rita Skeeter in her animagus form, an unregistered beetle, and traps her in a magically sealed glass jar. This is not a moment of light-hearted comedy. It is a victory that demonstrates Hermione's ability to beat an adult at her own game. As Rowling writes, "You're an unregistered animagus, you can spend a year in Azkaban for that." With this one line, the stakes become clear. Hermione is not just threatening to tell on Rita, she is holding her freedom hostage. It is blackmail, and Hermione knows it. This is no longer about following rules or trusting that authority will fix the problem. It is about taking matters into her own hands and using the system's weaknesses to protect her friends. What makes this subplot so powerful is the way it challenges the reader's perception of Hermione as the good girl of the group. Up until this point, she is the one who lectures Harry and Ron about following school rules, the one who insists that homework must come first, the one who calls others reckless. Yet here, she steps into morally grey territory. She is willing to imprison Rita Skeeter in a jar, feed her sugar cubes, and keep her locked up until she swears not to publish lies again. The Hermione who once scolded her friends for sneaking around after hours is now engaging in coercion that borders on cruelty. It is a startling development, but one that makes her infinitely more human and more layered. The films, however, erase this complexity. The cinematic Hermione, as portrayed by Emma Watson, is intelligent, brave, and fiercely loyal, but she is also consistently portrayed as the moral compass of the trio. By removing the Rita Skeeter subplot, the films deny audiences the chance to see Hermione use strategy, deception, and a darker kind of cleverness. Without Skeeter, the movie version of Hermione remains in the neat box of the smartest student in the room. She never crosses the invisible line that separates rule following from manipulation, and as a result, her character loses some of its fascinating contradictions. This omission is especially damaging when we consider how it reduces the stakes of Rita Skeeter's role in the story. In the books, the Skeeter is not just an irritating journalist, but a true antagonist whose actions harm people deeply. She exposes Hagrid's secret, nearly destroying his career. She plants seeds of doubt about Harry's mental state, undermining his credibility at a time when the wizarding world desperately needs to believe him. Most importantly, she weaponizes Hermione's friendships and turns them into headlines that draw cruel public attention. Without the subplot of Hermione capturing her, the films leave Skeeter as a background nuisance rather than a genuine threat, stripping the story of its sharp commentary on media, truth, and manipulation. When we remember the book version of Hermione, we see someone who is capable of fighting systemic injustices on her own terms. She doesn't just complain about Skeeter's articles or hope that Dumbledore will intervene. She actively investigates, uncovers the animagus secret, and uses the information as leverage. This is not only a triumph of intellect, but also an act of defiance against adults who wield power irresponsibly. Rowling deliberately gives this victory to Hermione, not Harry, because it is part of her growth. She is not simply the sidekick who provides useful facts. She becomes a leader who can outthink and outmaneuver her enemies. The psychological depth of this storyline also deserves attention. Hermione's choice to blackmail Rita Skeeter raises uncomfortable questions about morality and justice. Was she right to hold someone prisoner, even if that someone had been spreading lies that caused real harm? Was it ethical to threaten an adult with Azkaban in order to secure silence? These are not questions with easy answers, but they highlight the way Rowling allows her characters to grapple with shades of grey. For young readers, it was a powerful message. Sometimes doing the right thing requires bending the rules, and sometimes the line between heroism and intimidation is thin. In the films, this complexity is flattened, and Hermione remains firmly on the side of moral certainty. The use of quotes in the book strengthens this impact when Hermione says, "You're going to keep your quill to yourself, aren't you, Rita?" It is not just the voice of a schoolgirl, it is the voice of someone who has learned to control a narrative and silence a destructive force. Compare this with the films where no such moment exists. There is no triumph of discovery, no capture, no glass jar, no threat of Azkaban. Instead, Rita Skeeter fades quietly into the background, robbed of the role she played as a catalyst for Hermione's transformation. One of the most striking consequences of this omission is how it alters the way audiences perceive Hermione's growth across the series. In the books, the Skeeter subplot foreshadows the Hermione who will later lead SPEW, who will risk everything to follow Harry on the Horcrux hunt, and who will make cold, pragmatic decisions in the heat of war. The Hermione who can trap Rita in a jar is also the Hermione who can erase her parents' memories to protect them, a decision that is both heartbreaking and brutally pragmatic. The films, by erasing her earlier greyness, make her later pragmatism seem less natural, almost out of character. The Hermione who emerges from the Skeeter incident is not weaker or more sinister. She is more complete. She shows that intelligence is not only about memorizing spells, but about applying knowledge in the messy, morally complex world. She demonstrates that standing up for the truth sometimes means using tactics that others might call questionable, and most importantly, she reveals that even the good characters are capable of bending the rules, just as the bad characters sometimes follow them. This richness is lost in the movies, and the result is a Hermione who, though admirable, lacks the dangerous brilliance that made her unforgettable in the books. For readers who grew up with the books, Hermione's handling of Rita Skeeter remains one of her most iconic triumphs. It was proof that she could outwit not just fellow students but also seasoned adults. It was evidence that she could be fierce when necessary and that she understood the power of secrets, leverage, and timing. For viewers who only know the films, that dimension of her character is invisible, leaving a Hermione who is perhaps more polished but undeniably less human. It is in those pages with the beetle in the jar and the whispered threats of Azkaban that we glimpse the true Hermione Granger, clever, determined, and willing to fight for justice, even if it means getting her hands a little dirty. Number 26. Hermione and Dumbledore's Army. Under the soft glow of candlelight in the Room of Requirement, the scene in the book carries a weight that the films never truly capture. It is Hermione Granger who plants the first seed of the idea, her sharp mind piecing together the despair at Hogwarts and turning it into action. In Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, J.K. Rowling makes it clear, without Hermione, Dumbledore's army would not have existed. She pushes the concept forward, recognizing that Harry's real strength lies not just in surviving Voldemort's attacks, but in his ability to teach others. Hermione's foresight in this moment is monumental, yet the films water it down, blurring her role into the collective will of the group. When Umbridge clamps down on the school, seizing power from Dumbledore and silencing dissent, the students are left powerless. In the book, Hermione is the one who names the problem and proposes a solution. Rowling writes that she had been thinking about it for a while and deliberately steers the conversation toward organizing secret lessons. Harry himself is reluctant, doubting his authority and teaching abilities, but Hermione presses him. "Harry, don't you see? This is exactly why we need you. You've actually done it. You can show us how." This is not a passive suggestion, but a carefully constructed argument that convinces Harry. The film version, however, shifts the weight of this decision, turning it into a vague moment of mutual agreement, stripping Hermione of the credit for her bold initiative. Perhaps the most brilliant detail in the book, and the one glaringly absent from the film, is the enchanted parchment. Hermione, wary of betrayal, crafts a list of names written on a piece of paper that every member of Dumbledore's army must sign. Unbeknownst to them, she charms it, so that if anyone tries to expose the group to Umbridge, the betrayer's name will be burned into their skin in thick, painful welts. This is pure Hermione, logical, cautious, and fiercely protective of the group's survival. Rowling describes it with sharp precision, and the later reveal of Marietta Edgecombe's disfigured face serves as a haunting payoff. Yet the film never breathes life into this clever, chilling spell, leaving Hermione's contribution invisible to the casual viewer. The difference is striking because it reshapes the audience's understanding of Hermione's character. In the book, she is not just the diligent student but the strategist, the architect behind resistance. Her plan is ruthless in its practicality. The spell is not a minor flourish but a statement of how far she is willing to go. It is a reminder that Hermione, though often guided by moral principles, is willing to act decisively when lives and freedom are at stake. In the films, this edge is dulled. She remains brilliant, yes, but less daring, less willing to bend rules in the name of justice. This erasure leaves her reduced, more aligned with the archetype of the clever sidekick than the formidable leader. Rowling wrote, "Consider the moment in the book when the group gathers in the Hog's Head for the very first time. Hermione has orchestrated it carefully, persuading students to attend, organizing the logistics, and even choosing the discreet location. Rowling makes her presence dominate that scene. She speaks with clarity and determination. We've got to be able to defend ourselves, she tells the others, her words piercing through the nervous chatter. It is her conviction that steadies the group, her belief in Harry that crystallizes into a movement. The film version condenses this into a simple meeting in the room of requirement itself, losing the tension and clandestine atmosphere that Hermione so carefully creates. What makes the book's Hermione so compelling is her foresight. She recognizes that resistance cannot be haphazard, it must be organized, shielded, and bound by trust. The enchanted parchment is both a literal and symbolic safeguard. It makes the students complicit in the cause and binds them with consequences. When Marietta betrays them, her punishment is immediate and irreversible. Rowling's description of her pustules forming across her face spelling the word sneak is unforgettable. It demonstrates not only Hermione's magical skill but also her understanding of loyalty and betrayal. The films never give us this chilling reminder of her cunning, instead glossing over the dangers of betrayal as though they never existed. By omitting these details, the films inadvertently rob Hermione of one of her defining acts of agency. Dumbledore's army becomes something Harry merely agrees to, almost by accident, rather than the carefully engineered product of Hermione's persistence. In this shift, the power dynamics within the trio also change. Book Hermione is often the one who moves the plot forward with her intellect and daring, while film Hermione frequently exists to soften Harry's doubts or deliver exposition. This diminishes the sense of her as a co-leader in the resistance, relegating her to the sidelines of her own greatest accomplishment. Even Harry's development as a teacher is shaped by Hermione's hand in the books. Without her insistence, he would never have stood before his peers, wand in hand, demonstrating spells. She sees his worth when he does not. It is her belief in him that compels him to rise to the occasion. Rowling makes it clear that Hermione's role is not just logistical, but deeply personal. She unlocks Harry's potential as a leader. The film gives this growth to Harry without acknowledging the catalyst. Viewers unfamiliar with the books might imagine that he simply decided on his own, but readers know better. It was Hermione's vision that set him on this path.